Imagine you are sitting in a dimly lit office in New York City during the final days of 1996. The air smells like cold coffee and old newsprint. Outside, the city is buzzing with holiday cheer and New Year's Eve plans. But inside this room, the atmosphere is freezing. Stacks of legal documents sit on a mahogany desk, and they tell the story of total disaster. On December 27th, Marvel Entertainment Group officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It turns out that having the world's most powerful superheroes on your side doesn't help when you owe $600 million. That is a staggering amount of money. To put it in perspective, it is enough cash to fill a literal warehouse from floor to ceiling. You probably think of Marvel as an unstoppable empire that owns every movie screen on Earth. But back then, the House of Ideas was a house of cards. The company was bleeding money faster than a comic book villain loses a fight. How did the world's most iconic heroes end up as scraps for billionaire scavengers? The story really starts a few years earlier. In the late 80s, a billionaire named Ron Perelman bought Marvel for about $82 million. He was a corporate titan who owned Revlon, the makeup giant. To Perelman, Spider-Man and the X-Men were just brands. He saw them as intellectual property that could be sold on t-shirts, lunchboxes, and stickers. At first, it seemed like he was a genius. He took the company public in 1991, and the stock price shot through the roof. The early 90s were a strange, frantic time for the comic industry. Fans weren't just reading books anymore. They were speculating. Everyone thought a rare #1 issue would pay for their house one day. People bought 5 copies of the same issue and kept them in plastic bags. Marvel played right into this. They released comics with shiny holofoil covers and limited edition stickers. If you looked at the stock price in 1993, Marvel looked like the future of entertainment. But then the bubble popped. It didn't just leak air, it exploded. Collectors realized that if everyone is hoarding a rare comic, it isn't actually rare at all. Sales crashed. The market for toys and cards dried up. Suddenly, Marvel was carrying massive debt from companies it had bought during the good times. Perelman tried to raise prices to cover the gap. This only made the fans angry. The tension in the boardroom was reaching a breaking point. The banks were breathing down Perelman's neck. They wanted their money back, and they wanted it now. Perelman had a plan to save the company by merging it with his other businesses, but it involved using Marvel's own money to pay for it. It was a high-stakes gamble that left the other shareholders feeling betrayed. Finance people still go back and forth on whether the 90s comic crash was a natural market correction or a disaster caused by Perelman's aggressive expansion. Regardless of the cause, the damage was done. Marvel was officially broken. The company was vulnerable, and the smell of blood was in the water. This is where the story takes a sharp turn. In the world of high finance, a bankruptcy filing is like a dinner bell for vulture investors. These are people who specialize in buying dying companies for pennies on the dollar. Among these investors, one name stood out. He was a man known for his iron will and his love for a good fight. His name was Carl Icahn. He wasn't interested in the X-Men's backstory or Captain America's shield. He saw a chance to take control of a legendary brand for a fraction of its value. He was about to start a corporate war that would last for years. Carl Icahn did not care about Peter Parker's secret identity or the lore of the Infinity Stones. To him, Marvel was just a collection of numbers on a spreadsheet that happened to be deeply undervalued. Icahn is the quintessential corporate raider. He built a legendary reputation by buying into companies, shaking up the leadership, and walking away with mountains of cash. When he saw Marvel's bankruptcy filing, he didn't see a dying comic book publisher. He saw a gold mine hidden under a pile of bad debt. His strategy was brilliant and ruthless. Instead of buying the company's stock, which was basically worthless at the point of bankruptcy, he started buying Marvel's bonds. Specifically, he targeted the senior secured notes. These are essentially I owe us that the company promised to pay back with interest. Because the company was failing, these bonds were selling for a tiny fraction of their face value. You might think of it like buying a winning lottery ticket from someone who is too frustrated to check the numbers. By early 1997, Icahn had snapped up enough of this debt to become a major power player in the courtroom. This move put him on a direct collision course with Ron Perelman. At the time, Perelman was still trying to keep his grip on the company. He had a plan to invest $365 million of his own money back into Marvel. On the surface, that sounds like a generous rescue mission, but there was a catch. In exchange for the cash, Perelman wanted to issue a massive amount of new stock. This would effectively wipe out the value for all the other shareholders while giving him total control. It was a classic squeeze-out move. Icahn wasn't having it. He led a group of bondholders who flat out refused to let Perelman's plan go through. This turned into a brutal legal stalemate. The bankruptcy court in Wilmington, Delaware became the arena for a heavyweight fight between two of the richest men in America. Every hearing was packed with lawyers in expensive suits arguing over the fate of Captain America. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Neither man wanted to blink first. There is still a real disagreement on whether Icahn actually wanted to run a comic book company or if he was just looking for a quick payout from a settlement. Some people believe he saw the long-term potential of the movie rights. Others think he was just playing a high-stakes game of poker to see how much money he could squeeze out of Perelman. You can almost feel the frustration of the Marvel employees watching from the sidelines. Their jobs and their creative legacies were being used as bargaining chips in a game they didn't understand. While the billionaires fought, Marvel was falling apart. The company had to lay off hundreds of workers. Quality was slipping because the best artists were leaving for other publishers. The brand was becoming toxic. Fans were worried that their favorite characters would simply disappear if the company went under completely. It was a dark time for anyone who actually cared about the stories. Icahn eventually won the first round. In the summer of 1997, a judge ruled that Icahn's group could take control of the Marvel board. He effectively kicked Perelman out of the driver's seat. It looked like the Vulture King had finally won his prize. But as Icahn was about to find out, taking control of Marvel was the easy part. Actually saving it from the wreckage was a completely different beast. He had successfully stormed the castle, but the castle was on fire. You notice the headlines in the business section are getting nastier by the day. It isn't just about money anymore. It is personal. Carl Icahn and Ron Perelman genuinely seem to dislike each other. In the world of high finance, these two are like the unstoppable force and the immovable object. Icahn is officially the chairman of Marvel now. He is finally sitting in the big chair. But the prize is a total mess. The company is basically a ghost town of unpaid bills and nervous editors. Perelman isn't walking away quietly, though. He launches a massive counteroffensive in the courts. He argues that Icahn's group is acting in bad faith to strip the company of its value. You might think of this as a scorched earth policy. If Perelman can't have Marvel, he wants to make sure Icahn's victory is as expensive and painful as possible. The legal fees are astronomical. Reports from the time suggest the lawyers were making more money than the people actually drawing the comics. Every day spent in court is a day Marvel isn't fixing its business. The stock price is a complete disaster. It drops to under $2 a share. This is a company that once felt invincible. Now, it is being treated like a bargain bin item at a garage sale. The tension reaches a peak during the deposition phases. These two men are used to getting their way. Now, they are trapped in a legal loop. Icahn wants to cut costs to the bone. He wants to stop the bleeding by slashing budgets and selling off secondary assets like the trading card businesses. He is a master of efficiency. But Marvel isn't a factory. It is a creative engine. You can't just cut your way to a hit movie or a best-selling book. Analysts still argue about whether Perelman's aggressive diversification into stickers and trading cards was the true killing blow for Marvel's finances. Some say the debt was manageable if the comic book market hadn't shifted so quickly. Others believe he treated the company like a personal ATM until the cash finally ran out. Either way, the billionaire brawl is sucking the life out of the brand. While these two giants are wrestling, a third group is watching from the shadows. They aren't billionaire raiders or makeup moguls, they are toy makers. Specifically, the team at Toy Biz, led by Ike Perlmutter and Avi Arad. They have an exclusive license to make Marvel action figures. This deal is the only thing keeping Toy Biz alive. If Marvel goes completely under, Toy Biz dies right along with it. You can almost see the sweat on their brows as they watch the court proceedings. They realize that if they don't act soon, the billionaires will burn the whole house down. Icahn and Perelman are fighting over who owns the ashes. The toy makers have a different plan. They don't just want to own Marvel. They want to save it. They start working on a secret third-way solution to end the war. They begin quietly talking to the banks. They are pitching a plan that would merge Toy Biz and Marvel into a single, healthy company. It is a David versus Goliath move. They don't have the raw cash that Icahn has, but they have something he lacks. They actually know how to sell toys and tell stories. They are about to launch a corporate coup that no one saw coming. The battle for the soul of the Avengers is about to move from the courtroom to the toy store. Enter Ike Perlmutter and Avi Arad. These guys were not from central casting for a Wall Street thriller. Ike was famously frugal. There are legendary stories about him picking up paper clips off the office floor to save a few cents. Avi was the creative soul, a man who actually understood why kids loved action figures. Together, they ran Toy Biz. You have to understand that Toy Biz was basically a limb of the Marvel body at this point. If the body died, the limb went with it. They were terrified that Carl Icahn would just sell off the movie rights to pay down debt and leave the rest to rot. The toy makers decided to play a very dangerous game. They didn't have billions of dollars sitting in a vault. What they had was a plan and a lot of nerve. They went to the banks that were tired of the Icahn-Perelman war. They pitched a merger between Toy Biz and Marvel. This wasn't just a business deal. It was a rescue mission. They argued that a toy company knew how to manage superheroes better than a guy who specialized in junk bonds. The tension in the courtroom reached a fever pitch in early 1998. Icahn was still the favorite to win. He had the most muscle and the most experience in these brawls, but the Toy Biz team found a strategic opening. They convinced the banks that their plan offered a more stable future. They promised to turn Marvel into a lean, mean, content-producing machine. They weren't just looking at the balance sheet. They were looking at the toy aisles and the movie theaters of the future. Icahn fought back with everything he had. He tried to block the merger at every turn. He argued that the Toy Biz deal undervalued the company and cheated the bondholders he represented. It was a messy, loud, and incredibly expensive fight. You might think of it as a chess match where both players are allowed to flip the table whenever they lose a piece. Economists still debate whether Icahn's defeat was a fluke or a sign that the era of the classic corporate raider was finally cooling off. Some say he simply underestimated the tenacity of the toy guys. Others believe the banks were just so exhausted by the litigation that they took the first exit ramp that looked halfway decent. Either way, the momentum was shifting. The verifiable turning point happened in the summer of 1998. A federal judge finally gave the green light to the Toy Biz merger. This was the moment the vulture lost his grip. The court decided that the Perelmutter-Arad plan was the best way to keep Marvel alive as a functioning business. Carl Icahn, the man who almost never loses, had been outmaneuvered by a couple of guys who sold plastic Spider-Man dolls. You can imagine the scene when the ruling came down. It was a massive upset. Icahn didn't walk away empty-handed, of course. He still made a profit on his bonds, but he lost the ultimate prize. He lost the keys to the kingdom. He walked away from the table, leaving the toy makers to pick up the pieces of a shattered empire. But the victory was bittersweet. The company they inherited was essentially a hollow shell. It had no cash, its best talent was gone, and its reputation was in the trash. The toy guys had won the war, but now they had to figure out how to govern a country that was completely broke. They had the characters, but they didn't have the money to make a single movie. They were about to learn that surviving a bankruptcy is only half the battle. You watch Carl Icahn walk away from the table, and it is a strange sight. On paper, he actually won. He reportedly walked away with a profit of about $100 million on his investment. For most people, that is a lifetime of wealth. You see him take his chips and move on to the next corporate raid without looking back. But in the grand scheme of history, he might have made one of the biggest tactical errors of his career. He traded a few $1,000,000 in short-term profit for the chance to own the most valuable entertainment property of the 21st century. The new owners, Ike Perlmutter and Avi Arad, didn't have time to celebrate. They were essentially standing in a basement that was slowly filling with water. The debt was still there. The brand was damaged. Their solution was a period of extreme rent-seeking. Since they didn't have the money to make movies, they sold the rights to anyone who would listen. They sold the X-Men to Fox. They sold Spider-Man to Sony. They even sold the rights to a theme park to Universal. This kept the lights on, but it meant they didn't really control their own stars. The tension during these years was incredible. The company was surviving on the scraps of licensing deals. Every time a Spider-Man movie made $1 billion, Marvel only saw a tiny fraction of that cash. It was a frustrating, slow way to build a business. Ike Perlmutter was famous for his frugality during this time. He reportedly monitored how many staples employees used and discouraged them from buying new office furniture. He was running a global brand like a neighborhood corner store. Finance people still go back and forth on whether Icahn's purely financial cost-cutting approach would have ever allowed for the creative risks that ultimately saved the company. Many believe that under Icahn, Marvel would have been stripped for parts and the characters sold off individually to the highest bidder. Instead, the toy guys took a massive final gamble. In 2005, they secured a $525 million loan from Merrill Lynch. The collateral for the loan was the movie rights to the characters they still owned, like Iron Man and the Avengers. If the movies failed, the bank would literally own the characters. It was total victory or total destruction. Everything changed in 2008. When the first Iron Man movie hit theaters, it wasn't just a hit. It was a cultural earthquake. Suddenly, the worthless characters that the billionaires fought over in a Delaware courtroom were the most valuable assets in Hollywood. You probably find it funny to think back to a time when Iron Man was considered a B-list hero that nobody wanted. But that was the reality of the market. The final confirmation of their success came in 2009. Disney stepped in and bought Marvel for roughly $4 billion. It was a staggering amount of money. The company that was literally bankrupt and broken just 12 years earlier had become the crown jewel of the Disney empire. You see the posters for the Avengers now, and you realize how close it all came to never happening. If Carl Icahn had held on for just a few more years, the entire history of modern cinema would look completely different. He was the man who almost owned the world, but he cashed out just before the gold was found. The story of Marvel's near-death experience is a wild reminder of how much of our world is shaped by a few people in a quiet room making high-stakes bets. It is fascinating to think that the movies we all watch today were once just line items in a bankruptcy filing. I would love to hear from you about where you are watching this from today. Whether you are catching this from a busy city in the States or somewhere across the globe, I hope your own economic situation is feeling a bit more stable than Marvel's was in 1996. What are your plans for the upcoming months? Are you looking to make some bold moves of your own, or are you in a season of playing it safe and building up your reserves? It is always great to see the different perspectives in the community. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the messy, dramatic history of comic book finance, please consider hitting the like button. It really helps the channel out. And if you want to make sure you don't miss our next story about the hidden deals that shape the world, go ahead and subscribe. There are a lot more stories like this one waiting to be told. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I will see you in the next one.